In this video, I'll repair the broken leg on this end table and magazine rack. This table belongs to my neighbor, and it's in pretty good shape except for the broken leg and this crack, which I'll also be fixing. The condition of the finish isn't too bad, although it does show some wear on the top, but it still looks pretty good overall. And the whole piece is made of solid walnut. The first thing I did was to fix the crack. Unlike the broken leg, this was a pretty clean break and just needed some wood glue and a few clamps. But I did need to cut out this little piece of scrap wood here to help me with the clamping. Since the leg is at an angle, I wouldn't be able to get a clamp on there as it is. So I just measured the angle of the leg, and then I just transferred that angle to the piece of scrap wood and made a cut at that angle, and the other end of the piece is straight. So that straight side is where I'll put the clamp. Before I glued it up, I applied some wax around the crack to make it a little easier to clean up any glue squeeze out that may happen. The wax will hopefully prevent the glue from sticking to the wood. And then I just applied the glue. And clamped it up. Next, I moved on to the broken leg, and this wasn't a very clean break, and it had been glued before, so there was a lot of dried glue on there. And I decided to use epoxy to glue this back together, since it was kind of a messy joint, and I didn't think wood glue would stick very well, especially with the remnants of the old glue on there. And I couldn't get the two pieces to come together tightly as they were. I think this may have been because the wood fibers had been hardened by the glue and they were no longer aligned, so they just weren't coming together as they would have naturally. So to try and fix this, I just kind of dug out some of the wood that was in there to make a little extra room for the two pieces to come together, and the epoxy would fill any voids that were left by removing the wood. But I didn't remove anything around the edge because I wanted those two original edges to come together. I just took out some material in the middle that may have been getting in the way. The glue up for this was tricky. I had to make sure that it was straight on all planes. So the method I came up with was to clamp a straight edge, in this case a level, to the upper half of the leg, and then use that straight edge to get the bottom half of the leg positioned correctly. So at least I'd know the leg was straight in that direction, and then I would just need to make sure that it was straight front to back. It wasn't leaning either way. And then I could apply the epoxy. which I darkened with a little bit of brown dye. And then get the leg in place. And clamp it up against the straight edge. And you can probably see I put some tape, some clear tape, around the leg just to make it easier to clean up any epoxy that's squeezed out. And once I had the clamp on, then I just took a straight edge and held it against the sides of the leg just to make sure those were also straight. And this joint probably could have benefited from a dowel inserted into the two pieces to help strengthen the joint once it was glued. But I couldn't do that because behind that little dark plug, I'm assuming is a screw that goes through the leg and into the bottom part of the magazine rack section. So in order to get a dowel in there, I would end up having to drill through the screw, which of course wouldn't work because then it would fall apart. Hopefully it'll be okay since it's not a chair or anything that will be holding too much weight. It should be okay with just the epoxy. I let it sit overnight, and once I took the clamps off, it looked good. It was nice and straight. So here's the joint after it's been glued up. And I'm wetting it down here just to get an idea of how it will look after some clear finish is put over it. And it doesn't look too bad. Although in hindsight, I probably made the epoxy a little too dark. Probably could have gone lighter on that. So I wanted to try to just touch it up a little bit, see if I could hide the crack a little more. First thing I did was to fill some voids that were there with some wood filler. Once the filler was dry, then I could start touching it up. And the first thing I tried was just some acrylic paints. I think I got these in a craft store. And there's lots of different ways you could do this, lots of different materials. And I just decided to try this first. And I tried to mix up a color that came close to the color of the wood. And this can be a pretty tedious process. Sometimes you get it looking pretty good, but then when you look at it from a different angle, it looks completely different. Or if the light changes and the light's shining on it differently, it looks different. And looking at it like this, with the table upside down, with bright light on it, the crack is pretty obvious. But when you flip it over and put it right side up on the ground, or in its natural habitat indoors with softer lighting, the crack is much less obvious. So how far you want to go with disguising the repair really just depends on your tolerance for imperfection. Once I was done with the touch-ups, I just put a very thin layer of clear wipe-on satin oil-based polyurethane over the touch-ups and over the whole table. And the purpose of this was to help seal in the touch-ups, and it just kind of freshened up the finish overall. And here it is, all back together in one piece. Thanks for watching.